We were hoping to have May Sam come today. So we're standing, two well-meaning settler women standing in front of you to open today. A little bit sadly, because May is not well today, so she was not able to come. So we are just here to officially welcome you and introduce Lorna, and Lorna will open us for the day. So again, it's Rachel, and would you like to do the territory acknowledgement?
Thank you. Thank you, Aliki. My name is Jasdeep, and I work as a community relations coordinator at the University of Victoria for the Faculty of Education. Aliki and I work together to organize this event. Thank you all who have joined us today in person and also virtually. I would like to acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional lands the university stands, and the Wasanich, Songhees, and Esquimalt First Nations who continue their relationship with the land today. My role as a settler is to continually reflect on my responsibility to the First Nations on these lands, and that also includes the responsibility and accountability for self-governance and to support the self-governance of the First Nations on these lands. I always struggle with large events like these because as an organizer with the amount of meaning and purpose attached to events like this, I always get nervous, and it can be challenging for me to ground myself and remind myself on the lands that I'm on and the good work that I am doing on these lands, and to take the time to ground myself. So I hope you can all join me in just taking a moment to take a deep breath in, out, to feel the weight of your feet on the floor, to feel your body in your chairs or where you're sitting, and to lift your shoulders, to lift any weights that you might be feeling, and to continually breathe. And remember, we are in this room today and online via Zoom, doing this work in a good way and with a good heart. Thank you. I'd like to take this moment to introduce someone who I admire. Dr. Wanot's Lorna William is a foundational advocate and leader in Indigenous Language Revitalization, who has received numerous honors and awards over her long career, recognizing her contributions to Indigenous education and her advocacy of Indigenous children, community members, and language revitalization locally and across the world. It would take all day to list and talk about all her awards and accomplishments, but a few of them include Order of Canada, Inspire Award, Order of British Columbia, the Diamond Jubilee Medal, Honoring Our Heroes Language Award, her role as chair of First Peoples Cultural Foundation, her recent role as part of Indigenous Languages Global Task Force that took part in the launch of UNESCO's Indigenous Languages Global Action Plan in Paris, France. Dr. Lorna Williams is a professor emerita of Indigenous education here at UVic, and our former and Canada Research Chair, where she envisioned and taught in the bachelor's and master's degree in Indigenous Language Revitalization, as well as a master's in counseling in Indigenous communities. Indigenous Education is delighted to be co-hosting this event with Lorna and to have an opportunity to hear her words, helping us understand better the global and local context of Indigenous language revitalization today. Please join me in welcoming Lorna to the stage to open the event. Thank you.
تلقوا للود أولى شوائش نشنوك نوكا تطلع آمش تقلب الجونة كمخ من توالة Oskaz qalut nam ti uhal mi kashla. It's a real honor for me to greet you, to welcome you onto the lands of the Sangis, the Esquimalt, and the Kuksanaich. And I gave my name, Wanosa, and the place where my relatives and my ancestors are, Lilwatuul. It's a wonderful thing for us to gather here to talk about Indigenous languages. It's I was home a couple of days ago in Mount Currie, and they were telling me that they're going to be celebrating 50 years, having a 50-year celebration of our school. In the early 70s, I guess it was in the late 60s, we started talking about taking over our own school, because up until then, we had never been able to. And at that time, my community was already seeing the changes to our language, that there were fewer and fewer speakers at the younger ages. But at that time, I have to say, I'm very blessed that that the language most often spoken was Litwat. And but you know, during the time that I was home, we had to really remind ourselves to use our language as we sat around the kitchen table. And but I want you to know that in those 50 years, communities around this province have worked so hard to retain their languages, to develop writing systems, to develop dictionaries, to develop programs where children and all age groups can learn their language. And most of this work was done by volunteers. There was very, very little funding available to support this work. And so anything that we have to say that we have it in gratitude to all the people who've dedicated their lives. And I came to the University of Victoria. I chose this place because in the 70s, when the linguistics department here began, there were people here, and the first department head of the linguistics department was dedicated to Indigenous languages. And he made a decision that everyone in the department would work on an Indigenous language. And so I knew about this. And one of the programs that they did with the Department of, with the Faculty of Education, was to develop a program for people living in the communities working on their languages. So people would come and they would study. And when I was getting ready to develop the bachelor's degree in Indigenous Language Revitalization, I took time to poke around to files that the secretary still had, and I read them, and I read about this journey here. And it informed me, because when I looked at what was happening in the communities, what I could see is that the communities that had been working so hard, so far, and had accomplished so much, were those community people who had become language experts in their communities. They're the ones who brought this language work forward. So I want you to say thank you to all the people who worked on this land that have supported our languages. It's a history that very few people know, but it's made a huge difference. There are many things that are happening now around the world. And I'm very blessed and very honored to have been invited to different places to see what people are doing and to listen to them. So for example, being invited to Cuba a few years ago, when I had been told for many, many years that the Taino were no more. And yet there were people from 9 villages. They gathered together to share what they still knew about their people, about their knowledge, even though it had been denied. It's really important for us to listen and to share these stories, because they're stories that are part of our history in this country. There are communities not far north of here on the island where I had been told all my life that the language was no longer spoken. The people are relearning that language. And it's the same with Tunaja. I had been told all of my work life in studying languages that language was no longer spoken. And yet, for a time, the Tunaja language had the most in the word lists at First Peoples. And it's because I was visiting there and having dinner one evening. I was facing the St. Mary's Residential School. And across from me was one of the people who was doing work on the language. He told me, he said, if you walk on those steps, he said, you see that they're like this. He said, and it's because of all the scrubbing I had to do when I attended that residential school, because he spoke his language. It was the only language he spoke. And every time the nuns and the priests heard him, he had to scrub those steps. He left his community, he told me, when he was 16. And I was so impressed because I met him when he was in his 70s. And I asked him, I said, were you able to keep your language when everybody said that this language was extinct? And what he said to me was, he said that he worked as a longshoreman in Seattle. And after his dinner every night, he sat on his bed, he was by himself, and he would talk to the wall in his language. He said, that's how I kept my language. This is a fairly common story, not just here in Canada, but around the world. There are Indigenous people who are working on their languages to keep them alive. I was in Paris. I was talking about the need for higher education to change its structures to support Indigenous languages. And I was talking about what people here are doing, but what we're finding. And after my talk, a man came to me And he said, I carry a French passport, but I'm not French. I speak French. And he told me that his father just passed away. And his father was the last speaker of their language. And their language spanned France and Germany. So the stories that we tell, the stories that we can share about what we are doing, about what is happening here, I'm telling you, is helpful to people around the world. So I encourage all the people who work at UVic to make sure that those stories are shared. And so today, you're going to hear first from Suzanne. She's going to present online. First Peoples Cultural Council has been around for quite some time now. And it has been through a huge process. But it's amazing what this organization has been able to do. Learning from people around the world, learning from people who in Australia, in New Zealand, learning from the Sami, from people in Africa. It's through sharing that we can help each other. In 2019, First Peoples held a conference that is still spoken about around the world. And it's because they were able to share the success stories of people learning their languages. And so they just published a report that Suzanne will share, and she'll begin now. Thank you.
Hey, it's Rachel, everyone. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but happy to join you over Zoom today. I'd like to thank Lorna for the introduction and thank the organizers for inviting me here today. And I'd like to acknowledge the territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh, which is where I am calling you from today. I'm here representing First Peoples Cultural Council and here to talk about our new report. First Peoples is a First Nations governed organization with a board of directors. There's advisory committees with the Language Advisory Committee has a representative from each of the 34 languages of BC. And there's also a Heritage Advisory Committee. So those, along with the board of directors, provide advice to the organization on our work. And the mandate of the organization is to revitalize First Nations languages, arts, culture, and heritage across British Columbia. The approach the organization takes is a collaborative, community-driven approach. So it's the communities themselves who are leading and carrying out the work. And we at FPCC are here to support them in that work. We do that through more than 20 funding streams for language, arts, and heritage. And but we're not just a funder. We provide training workshops, coaching, and mentorship opportunities, along with resources and tools to ensure that communities can be successful in their work. We also do research and advocate, particularly with the government. And our programs are creating jobs in communities across British Columbia. So I'm here to talk about our new report today. So what is this report all about? Well, ever since 2010, we've been collecting surveys from First Nations communities. So the information, the data comes from communities themselves. And the report tracks accomplishments around language revitalization and celebrates all of the successes that we're seeing over time. It's meant to provide benchmark data so that we can see that we are making improvements in language revitalization, and hopefully it's useful to communities themselves in terms of their language planning, along with our funders and others who are interested in learning about the First Nations of British Columbia. This is our 4th report then since 2010. So I want to start by talking a little bit about the language context over the last 4 years. And I'm sure I don't have to tell any of you here what the last few years have been like with the COVID-19 pandemic. But that's not been the only challenging thing that's been going on. 2021 had the costliest wildfire season in BC history, and that was followed by severe flooding in November of 21. Many First Nations communities were evacuated as a result of those events, and many are still evacuated. Some people have not returned to their homes yet. So you can imagine it makes it very difficult to do language revitalization work if you're not even in your own community and in your own homes. The pandemic, of course, with the distancing that happened, of course, people were innovative. People were, like today, going on Zoom and doing a lot of language learning that way. But we know that that's been challenging. It's never as good as meeting in person. So those are the kinds of challenges that have been taking place over the last 4 years of the report. On the other hand, there's been a lot of positive things happening over the last 4 years. So there's been unprecedented levels of funding from both the provincial and federal governments. Both levels of government have also passed legislation relating to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is very promising. And as Lorna mentioned, it's the International Decade of Indigenous Languages from 2022 to 2032. So there's exciting things happening all around. So this report is called the Status Report. So what does that mean exactly, and how do we measure language status? Well, the things that we focus on in the report are, first of all, the number of speakers of each of the languages. And we divide this into fluent speakers. These are generally people who speak the language as their first language, but not necessarily, because we've had many adults in BC who've become really quite proficient speakers, even though they're second language learners. But basically this category is just if you or your community considers this person a fluent speaker, that's what we mean there. There's also a category of semi-speakers, and this is a much broader category, but basically it means you speak somewhat. You probably can carry out a conversation, but maybe you can't converse about everything. But a semi-speaker needs to be, definitely someone who can speak beyond the basic level and is identified by their community as a semi-speaker. This might also include silent speakers, people who grew up speaking the language when they were small and maybe haven't spoken it in many years, but they have a really, really good understanding of the language, but perhaps don't currently speak it. We also count language learners in the report, and we count language learning domains from preschool all the way through adult. I do want to point out, though, this is not everything. There's, of course, a lot involved in language revitalization that we don't talk about in the report. So we're mainly focusing on these 3 areas when we're measuring status in this report. So the data in the report comes from all 34 languages this time. This is the first time we've had data on all 34, which is really exciting. Those languages belong to 7 different language families. And we heard back from 167 out of 204 communities. So about 82% reporting. I should point out that some communities have more than one language. In fact, there's a couple communities that have 3 different languages. So if you think about having a data set for each language from each community, it's actually 218 data sets in total. So a bit more than the 204 communities. And we received 180 out of those 218 data sets. So about 140,000 people in all. So some of the highlights that I want to talk about, the speaker category, 2.4% of the population are fluent speakers, and nearly 5% of the population are semi-speakers. And this is an increase from our last report, which we're really excited about. So in many cases, those are more of those adult second language learners who are becoming more proficient and are now counted as semi-speakers. This is consistent also with the results of the census, the 2021 census that came out recently last fall, that they count things a little differently, but basically found the same result, that there's a larger number of adult second language learners who are using the language at home. Excuse me. Combined, there's then just 10,355 speakers overall, which is very exciting. And this is about 7.4% of the population that reported to us. The little chart there I want to draw your attention to, because while fluent speakers are generally in the older age groups, what's really promising to look at the semi-speakers is that they're spread right through the age range, including under 25. More than 21% of semi-speakers are under the age of 25, which is really promising. Language learners in this category, and anyone can be a language learner. So if non-speakers might be learning, semi-speakers might be learning, and sometimes even fluent speakers might be counted as learning if they're actively engaged in learning more. So learners make up 12.2% of the total population, and this is more than a 20% increase since 2018, our last report. And I really want to emphasize, remember those challenges I told you about in the beginning, the pandemic, the forest fires, the flooding. There's been a lot of challenges, a lot of struggles over the last 4 years. So to see any increase at all is fantastic, I think. And to see such a great increase like this, I think is really, really great. And it also speaks to the difference that the support from both levels of government, the province and the federal government, what a difference it makes when you have more funding to do this work, because people want to learn. And if the opportunities are there, they definitely take advantage of those opportunities. As for domains of language learning, this is preschool and children here. The language nests are our full immersion preschool level programs. Those have increased from 10 nests in 2018 to 32 nests. And so nearly 400 children are getting nearly 18 hours a week immersion in their language. And languages are also offered in Head Start and other early childhood education programs and in First Nation schools on reserve. And I do want to point out the public schools. We hadn't asked about public schools in previous reports, but 72% of First Nations in British Columbia live off reserve now. So kids are attending public schools. So it's really important to have those language learning opportunities there as well. and 139 public schools were reported as offering First Nations language classes. One really exciting development is there is one public school in the province in Campbell River that's now offering an immersion and bilingual program as well. So it would be fantastic to see more of those. As for adult learners, in terms of formal programs, there's more than 1,695 programs averaging around 5 hours a week. But really exciting is the adult immersion programs, which increased from 2 to 8. So those are full-time adult immersion programs in 7 different languages. One of our own programs that uses immersion to create new speakers, the Mentor Apprentice program. There we've seen an increase from 27 teams in 5 years ago to 150 teams this last fiscal year. If you get a chance to look at the reports, I'll share a link at the end. You can download it from our website. One of the highlights in this report is we interviewed a number of families, because what we're seeing more and more is people speaking to their own children at home. So oftentimes these are adults who have themselves were second language learners, so they only learn to speak their language as an adult, but they've become proficient enough that they're now aiming to make the main language of their home their own First Nations language. So children are learning in the home. So intergenerational transmission has been restored in many cases, and we're just seeing more and more of these cases, which is really, really exciting. You won't need First Peoples anymore once you have people able to pass on the language in their home, right? So this is our ultimate goal to reach. If you're interested in a particular language, the report does have all of the information I've provided so far. Has been summary information, but you can also look and see for each language how many speakers and so on. You can also check out our online map and look up information on each language, including these statistics. They're not quite up there yet for the new report, but they will be soon. So overall, we're really optimistic about the future for First Nations languages in the province. With government pledges to provide adequate, sustainable, and long-term funding, we're really hopeful that the growth that we've observed in this report will continue. We're really proud at First Peoples Cultural Council to support First Nations communities in BC with their goals to revitalize and maintain their languages well into the future. Before I wrap up, I do want to put a little advertisement out there as well, because I'm hoping there might be some students in the audience. And I just want to let everyone know that one of our newer programs, it's called Youth Empowered Speakers Program. It's accepting applications right now. The deadline is June 14th. And this is for anyone who wants to work towards a career as a language teacher or an early childhood immersion educator. And the grant is up to $30,000. It will provide the Mentor Apprentice language learning. It will provide tuition and living expenses for your studies. There's a tech allowance. There's a summer paid work internship. So it's really great opportunity if you know any youth 18 to 35 who might be interested in doing that. I also want to wrap up by thanking everyone involved in this report. It was a real team effort, and of course, especially thanking the 167 community members who submitted the surveys, because we couldn't do it without their work. You can check out all of our programs at the website there and download the report from there as well. I'm happy to answer any questions. You can email me, and I think we do have a couple of fantastic language coaches, and I think Glenn Jim might be in the audience. So Glenn, if you're there, you can give a wave. And if anyone has any questions in person, you can chat with Glenn afterwards. Thank you.
Are there any questions? I will do one or two before we move on.
I just have a question about ultimatum, because the statistics are the whole are for the three. And I'm just wondering if First People had information for each of those three separate that they could share.
Did you hear that, Suzanne?
Yep. Yeah, so the three dialects, yeah, definitely we know which communities speak which dialect, so we could certainly provide you the breakdown of that if you contact us directly.
Thank you.
I would say you're on the island there. Most of the speakers are Hulkmeetnam speakers on the island of those three dialects.
Yeah, the report, I think, can do its best with the data that it collects from the communities. And so it depends on the communities too, as to what they report. Yes?
Hi, I'm Nicole Jackson. It's great to see the work that First People is doing. I did have something come up for me when she was talking about the silent speakers as well as the semi speakers. And I'm from the Gitxsan territory, and we practice the feasting system. And one of the challenges that we're having, like my mom is a silent speaker. So when we're at a feast and the chiefs are speaking to the event and what's happening, we're by my mom, and you know, she kind of translating what is being said. And I just kind of thought of an idea that could potentially be something that First Peoples might be interested in, is looking at those Gitxsan, or not Gitxsan, but First Nation communities that do practice the feasting system, and how to get that new generation, well, we were generated that I, you know, me coming in. I know words that I picked up in the feast hall. I know certain action words, and but you know, that's something that I thought. Has there been any exploration around looking at the, you know, say the big house here in the Coast Salish and Chalmers and Guak, and then the feasting system in the Northwest communities?
We don't have a program specifically for that, but we do have Pathways, which is called an open strategy grant. So communities propose their own program within Pathways. And I think there have been a couple that have focused on like big house language and, you know, having some learning around that. So certainly under Pathways, a community could propose to do something like that.
And I'm really pleased to have amongst us today people not only who work, you know, province-wide as the people at First Peoples, but people who work in the communities. And we have with us today Russell from the Tsilhqot'in, and I'm so pleased that he is here to share the work that they're doing. I want you to know that I always try to remind people that the people that the workers who are working on our languages in our communities often have many other responsibilities not just in their families, their communities, but a myriad of responsibilities of different challenges that communities face. And Russ, I think, is one of those people. He's been the leader of his community. He's now a leader in the language work. And I'm so pleased that he drove here from from way up there, long way, to come and share with you the work that they're doing. Russ?
So go with me, Russell Myers Raw. Ba David Ross, Beth Sean Quill, Madeline Myers Haley, Eunice 18, yeah. My name is Russell Myers Ross. I'm from Eunice 18. Just want to say thank you to Lorna and Suzanne for sort of setting the tone for today. And my presentation might be a bit of a free ramble from just some of my experiences in the South Coteau Nation. But I think this is just for me an opportunity to share a bit about my community, a bit about myself, and some of the work that we're doing. I think for today, it's just being able to share a little bit about my family. That one picture on the top left there, that's my Sian Sue, Helena Haile. So it's my grandmother with my mother, late Malene. And then sort of the bottom there, I see my kids, Neelina and Lunakai. It's my daughters. And a lot of the work when I became chief in 2012, they became sort of the center around how I viewed leadership, and the things that I pursued was in essence to try to make sure that they're, welcomed in a world that, is comfortable and nurturing, and trying to make sure that they're able to live as much as that South Cotean culture as they can and be exposed to it. So a lot of the things that I've done sort of really is centered around my children. These are just clips. I want to acknowledge that I am a former chief. I spent 2 terms starting out in 2012 and continuing to 2020. So I've been sort of all over the map in a sense, and I sort of wanted to set it up partly just to kind of like highlight all the different aspects of the work that I've experienced, but try to like kind of hone in on sort of language kind of closer to the end, but just, trying to see how all things are connected in essence. So this is a bit about just, pictures to highlight my community itself, Eunice 18. So if you can imagine, so Williams Lake is up north. These are rural communities. And Eunice 18 is about an hour west of Williams Lake. Sort of pavement for the first little bit, and then the last like 10 kilometers, 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers is on gravel road coming in. And we've got kind of rolling pastures and hay meadows, and it's a bit of a horse culture. And I highlight, a lot of the identity is like centered around the river, Saifco, and Saifco team, meaning the people of the river, and sort of the lifeblood of the community as the salmon come up each year. People would depend solely on the salmon. And these are pictures from the community. We kind of captured in comprehensive community planning. These are from their eyes, what their community looks like. And I, sometimes I start out by talking about the South Cotean War. These little pictures come out of essentially my master's project from UVic here that I did in the Indigenous governance program. But it was sort of me trying to understand myself through stories, like whether it was stories from our own teachings or stories from sort of the past, but trying to figure out like what is my story and how do I fit into this situation here. But without telling the story about the South Cotean War, people might not understand the South Cotean. So sometimes I try to convey this as best I can. So, I think like about 1860s, 1850s and 60s, the Hudson's Bay Company was really set up, to do more of the fur trade, but they acknowledge Indigenous law. They practiced Indigenous law wherever they were. And, but at a certain point, the Quesnel goldfields was sort of the aim for a lot of the settlers. So they're moving up a lot more. And at a certain point, the colonial government here in Victoria decided that they were going to preempt land. So they start staking land at the same time that they're bringing in smallpox, almost identical on the day at times. And we were one of the nations that were hit by that. What pursued afterwards was, there's kind of two waves of smallpox that came in, and then I think in 1862. And sort of people remembered it. So there was one village of 500 people that got nearly wiped out, and there was just two young girls that survived. And this is, and smallpox is pretty brutal, and it's very quick. Usually 10 days to contract and 10 days to before people lose their lives. And in 1864, there's still settlers still trying to mount attempts to try to build new roads into the Chilcotin. At a certain point, there was a few skirmishes, and I think there's a person at South Cotin named Sain Haile, and he with a group at South Cotin decided that they were gonna take out anybody that threatened them with smallpox. So the road builders, they were about 14 people lost their lives at South Cotin. There's about 3 survivors. They came back to Victoria, built 2 militias, one from Victoria here and another in the interior. And they spent the whole summer trying to find this war party. They had some skirmishes, and eventually the settlers sort of put out a truce, a white flag, to bring the war party in, and they offered tobacco. And then at this juncture, it's the first time the governor, Frederick Seymour, first time a governor from the British colony actually came to South Cotin lands. They had a peaceful arrangement. He asked to leave peacefully, but that night they shackled the South, like about a few of the South Cotin war leaders, eventually brought them to Quesnel, did a show trial, and then hung them. So this is significant not only for just at South Cotin, but for British Columbia in a sense. Not only did smallpox run through the course during that time, but we see huge amounts of population loss, but this is sort of the major shift in BC where, where colonial law essentially started, where there was the admission from the Hudson's Bay Company that South Cotin law existed. And then after this was sort of like the slow taking over and the establishment of reserves and the taking of children away for residential schools. So I share this, and then I sort of fast forward, even though that might be the past, fast forward to about 10, 20 years ago, and we've got a mine that wants to enter into the South Cotin territory. So this is Totem B, it's sort of the lake, sort of in the center. And this was the proposed in, I think, 2008 or so, to sort of build like a massive, 1 or 2 kilometer open pit mine right beside one of our lakes. And what I want to convey is more the resistance of the South Cotin, that we have this sort of drive for struggle, and admission that this isn't, we're not going to be pushed over, and this is our land. And so some of the pictures, they highlight not only like our presence on the land, but that we're there to fight for it. And then this is sort of where I'm sort of getting to. So, I mean, the aftermath of those, so we went through 2 environmental assessments from BC and Canadian government. We managed, it was unprecedented that we had to go through 2 of those processes, but we ended up, finding that there's potentially adverse environmental effects and, infringement even on our rights. And those 2 proposals were denied. But I want to highlight in this map that, there's also so that was 2010, 2013. In 2014, there was a Supreme Court of Canada decision called the South Coteen decision that acknowledged that South Coteen title exists. And so that's sort of the red hash marks. And then not too long afterwards, as a community of Honey, Gwiteen and Unisseteen, sort of, and supported by the South Coteen Nation, sort of declared a Daziko, what we call the tribal park at the time. So that's in in sort of the purple hash marks. Okay. I'm gonna switch to a quick video, but I think, this is cool. So this was a video we did, a lot of the work that we did to announce Daziko, we've tried to convey it in different ways. And I think one of the best way was through my now late uncle, who should have shared his experience on the land and sort of his perspectives. Yeah, I wanted to share that just to so you have a glimpse of what the land looks like, what the language sounds like, the elders that have, preserved the language, the culture, that yearning of bringing people out on the land. And I think even for that topic about the mine, or, it consumed us, like as a community, as a nation, that was, how that's what we dealt with for probably 5 or 6 years, was just trying to defend ourselves against a mining company. So a lot of our energy was pulled in that direction. But I think the beauty of it too is that you kind of need a little bit of fight to remember what your values are. And so, it pushed us a lot. And with the announcement of Daziko that came in 2014, we were clear like what we wanted and what we valued. It was even the youth that was a bit of a mini renaissance in a sense, because even the youth that got to hear their parents or their leaders speak, a lot of their work came out through like poetry or drawings or other forms of art, which was really neat to see. But it sort of had that revisiting, what it means to be South Coteen, or what it means to keep their language and culture alive. So yeah, I wanted to share that, and and how just that culture of resistance, still in us. But sort of switching over, that like all those pushes for land recognition in some ways, kind of pushed into more planning, at least for me as a community and as a nation. For me in the community, it was like economic development planning, comprehensive community planning, management planning, housing, emergency, energy, health, etc. And then language revitalization planning, which was, which came on in 2015. But even on the nation level, we had, the title decision in 2014, then sort of pre-negotiations with the province in 2015 and 16, bringing the federal government along in with the Gwitz'in-Nielti Pathways Agreement in 2019 to form the kind of a tripartite. And then it formed the 8 foundational pillars around governance, education, economic, housing, language and culture, lands, justice, and children and families. So, we kind of keyed in on focusing on those things as being a foundation for growth. And then just, I wanted to share, I just highlight, beyond, because I'm going to move into language, but just highlight that even looking at housing has a component of what, we need to see or what we need to create within our communities. And sort of, these are sort of pictures I drew up. My kids even helped draw or color this other one in. But the idea was that we're kind of looking back, and you can see kind of the top frame is actually came from our court decision. We're digging through stuff that I found with my great auntie Mabel Williams Haley, who kind of shared what the underground pit house would have looked like, or underground winter homes. And then, and then when we were thinking about how to develop housing, it was sort of like, what do we want to see within it? And, so I draw draw like a family within it, a centered dwelling. But the idea was that even for language to survive, everyone would comment on how they had just basically the, one room homes. Like everyone was just stacked in the little cabins, so you couldn't help but hear the language. And so, yeah, so even in thinking about, our planning, we moved from looking at how do we get our own trees, how do we develop our own mill in the community, and then how do we build our own housing. So we were able to do those things, and it's still there to create and design what our houses should look like in terms of how do we think through what a family dynamic should look like in the household, and what culture are we kind of continuing if we if we're leaving it to the shoddy home builders, or thinking about our own design. So, and then so I have Paula who will cover a lot of this stuff, but I just have from some of my perspectives on some of our language revitalization work is that we started off by working with 3 different communities in that South Gwiteen. So it wasn't just us, it was also Honey Gwiteen and Tlesko. And we developed, in each community had meetings and developed a bit of a vision and purpose, and try to establish a terms of reference for the language committees to emerge. And then in each community we did prioritization. So I just kind of captured a few that UNICEF team came up with. So the language nest concept, having culture camps, and workshops on the land, and then mentorship, and also adult courses and immersion. And then a lot of Paula's work was sort of almost fit like a glove in a sense, because when she came, the idea was that she would do a lot more in-depth interviews with the community. So there's, for some of the planning, sometimes you only have, a couple of sessions to really get through stuff with the community. But what she was able to do was actually interview people and groups of people individually, and then sort of collate all that work into, her dissertation, but then into our language planning work. And then also over time, from 2015 on, our relationship with First Peoples Cultural Council has continued to, continue to emerge. And, sort of our reliance on developing programs. But if we didn't have that, financial security in a sense, we wouldn't be able to kind of learn and adapt our programs over time. So yeah, and I'm mostly storytelling through pictures here, but yeah, you can see our, over the few years that we were there, we were able to find funding to create our, to create our own space for the language nest to operate. And there's sort of a picture in the middle there of the elders welcoming everyone in, and we had little certificates and stuff like that for the, the first cohort of language nest students. And then, yeah, some of our work with Paula was also combined with by me, Williams, who was actually a UVic student, master's student at the time, and came up to my community, working more on like how to develop a guardianship program. And yeah, and then they had a successful workshop with the school children in our school. And then one of the first things we, came out of in terms of prioritizing the language plan was, everyone wanted a culture camp. So almost the first year we were able to set something up, and I think we centered it around sort of fish gathering. So that I think we had a full 5 or 6 days in that campsite. And then these are pictures of the language nest, sort of seeing some of the activities. I think the one is a bit of a fashion show. People in the community putting dresses together, and the kids getting fully involved. And then obviously I think the bottom left one was like a hike to the cabin. My uncle William, who I showed just a while back, but he built a cabin as well. And the kids got to go on a bit of an adventure walking out to the cabin. And then I'll sort of wrap up here. But yeah, I think even reflecting what Suzanne was saying about it being hard the last couple of years, like in 2017, we were hit by the wildfires, so that disturbed us a little bit. And then, yeah, obviously with COVID, those last 2 years have been rough. So we moved, we were building quite a bit of momentum around in our community, mobilizing. We had mentorship groups where we were pairing like elders and youth together. And we had to sort of shift a lot of the coursework into Zoom, some of the Zoom work, which has its advantages and disadvantages. And but now we're hoping we can build a bit more momentum again coming up. But yeah, so other than, I think, yeah, Paula she'll probably cover a lot more of the programs and projects that we had, but we try to use the plan. Anytime we could find funding, we'd always reflect back on what our language plan says and what we need to sort of like focus on. And what I'm and what I also want to acknowledge too is just maybe just the community that we have is in one way it's trying to revive itself, and we also have great mentors as well. So I want to kind of highlight Mariah here in a few of these pictures. She's really showing that she can she's out on the land all the time. She gets so excited doing this type of work. But we have Mariah Myers. We have our school, which is almost like predominantly First Nations teachers. We've got Selena Myers, who does a lot of the work at the Language Nest. So we really have like a group of elders that are able to like really support this work and are always behind it. So honestly, we as a community, I don't think we could have done it without our elders like sticking with us. But yeah, I don't know. There's lots more to share, but I'll leave it to that. And I think Paula can probably fill in a lot of the gaps around like some of the programming or some of the how she developed the research and how she got integrated into our plan. So
I think you gave a really good overview of what I was talking about when I was saying that the people in the communities have to have so many areas that they have to take care of in order to be able to keep their communities and their lands protected and functioning. And language is one of them, but it's just one of an array. And so you gave a really good example of that, and I really appreciate that, Russ. We'll do questions after Paula. And I'd like to introduce Paula Laita Palares. I think that I got that right. I was bringing a group of PhD students to Spain, and I was given the task of doing a session for them on the Basque language, which I knew nothing about. And but as usual, as a teacher, I have to figure it out. And so I was asking and asking, and what I noticed was for many in Spain, when they talk about the Basque people, it could be like like how we're talked about here, you know, that our languages are too difficult and they don't know where we came from and or who we are. And I was hearing kind of similar things, and I realized that you know the challenge of talking about ourselves, sharing who we are, is really just at the beginning. And I wasn't sure how I was going to do this, and then I heard about Paula from First Peoples Cultural Council. So I emailed, we were put in touch, and I explained to her my situation. And so she came forward and stepped right in and gave me a hand. And I brought the group over. We had an amazing, amazing session on the Basque language in San Sebastian. And she and her colleagues described to us the work that they're doing and the challenges that they're facing, and really taught us a lot about the languages in the European Union. And one of the questions that I had was, why were they not at the opening of the Decade of Indigenous Languages? And then I learned that they're not considered an Indigenous language in the European Union. And so even this term is so political, and the way that it's used and how we use it and who it refers to. And then during my studies and my search, I saw a people who've retained their language after wave after wave after wave of colonization, beginning with the Romans, the Vikings, the Muslims, the Christians, the Castilians. And so they were able to retain their language and their cultural identity. What sets them apart as a Basque people? I was so impressed, just because I've seen the devastation of our languages and cultural knowledge here and amongst the Indigenous people in different parts of the world. And so to know that Paula is Basque, and she worked for many years with the Tzilcotin, there's an understanding, a conceptual understanding of that work. And so I'm so grateful that I was connected to her, that we worked together, we're friends, and we've learned from one another. Paula, could you come and share?
Paula Laita naiz, euskalduna naiz, Euskal Herritik nator, euskaraz hitz egiten dut. eta familian euskara galdu zen orain dela 4 belaunaldi eta birraiten izan zen azken izuna. Hi everybody, my name is Paula Laita. I'm from Basque Country in northern Spain, and I speak Basque. I'm a fluent speaker, but the language got lost 4 generations ago. So my great-great-grandpa was the last one speaking in the family, and now I'm the first generation who like recovered the language in my family. And I wanted to show the picture on the screen. I think that's a very, I don't know, like graphic image of my own journey. So that's me in the middle here, over here. And that's at my school. And I'm maybe like, I think like 7 years old or something like that. And I was not aware about what was happening around me or why I was dancing that. And I just like the dancing and the music. And the thing is that I went to a Spanish school, a Catholic school. We only had an hour a day in the language, but we did have a lot of the culture. Like we were involved in a lot of the dances and the music, and that was pretty present in the school. But I think I can remember when I was a kid that I had like just a little piece of my identity was missing, so I could feel okay, I know I'm Basque, but I don't speak the language, but I know the dances, and I know the music. And so it was a little bit, there was always like this summer camp, and then we had like Basque kids like speaking in Basque and Basque kids speaking in Spanish, and I was always in the Spanish group. So even if I was a kid, I remember having that identity conflict, like who am I? So for the Basque people, it's really important for our identity to maintain our language. But I was just able to understand that later on. So when I went to university, actually my background is in languages. I learned a bunch of languages because I studied translation and interpreting, and then I did my master's degree in translation and intercultural communication, and then later on my PhD. I was like, I know English, German, French, Italian, I studied Japanese, and then I didn't know my own language when I came back home. So around, I think I was like 23 when I went to an adult immersion school. And we will see later that those are key for the language revitalization in Basque Country. So I spent a year, it's like 5-6 hours a day in this program, and I became fluent. So a lot of people from my generation became fluent in the adult schools. So anyways, that's just for a little bit of the background on. I think it's important because a lot of the work that I've done through my whole life is related to this picture. Like it's related to why I dedicated my life to revitalize my own language, but also working with other people's like Indigenous Language, because I do know that it's very important to recover that piece of our identity. So just I was asked to share about the Basque experience and that connection between myself between the Basque and the Saskatoon. So this is where I was going, or where I would share today. Just a little bit of just a quick overview about the Basque experience, which was hard because it's been like 30 years of language revitalization, but just to know a little bit what happened there and where we are at now. And then the work with Nankai and Indigenous Language and Russell for the last 9-10 years. And then just what I learned from all that work. Like I think sometimes when you get out from your own place or your own like reality, you learn a lot about yourself too. And so then my own experience with Indigenous Language and the work we've done there brought me some thoughts and learnings about language revitalization that can be applied to most of the cases around the world and the peoples who are revitalizing their language. So I'll start with where I come from. So there's some pictures from Basque Country, which is beautiful, of course, because it's my home. And as you can see, there's ocean, mountains, rivers, creeks. They're awesome for summer. It's not a very, we will see later, but it's not a very big area compared to BC or even the South Plateau territory. But it's very diverse. It's the ecosystems and the landscape changes in a few kilometers. I'm from the ocean, so I grew up at the ocean. So my childhood was just at the beach and on the rocks and gathering octopuses and shells and fishing. My dad liked to fish a lot, so my brother and I we even stay up at night gathering like squid and learning how to catch an octopus without like, so they crawl up on your arm. And yeah, so that was my childhood. Now I live more south, which is like those pictures up in the mountain with a different country, but yeah, I love both. So this is just to locate where Basque Country is. Euskal Herria means Basque Country. It's in northern Spain and southern France. So you can see the pink dot in there. And there is 7 different provinces. So this is the whole territory, what we call Basque Country. And we call Basque Country the territory where people speak Basque. But the Spanish government doesn't, so the official Basque Country of the province is only these 3 provinces. And then there is 3 other provinces in France which are not considered part of Basque Country. But for us, it is because they speak Basque, even if they are just on the other side of the mountain. I realize there's a lot of people here too that are divided by political borders. So I thought that was interesting because for me, when I cross the border here, I'm not living in my home. Like they still speak the same language, we have the same lifestyle, same culture. So the area is about 30,000 square kilometers. And there is about 3 million people. But not all that people are Basque. So there's a lot of immigration too from other parts of Spain and now from other places in the world. And from those 3 million people living in Basque Country, there is about 800,000 speakers, which seems a lot compared to the basic languages and other languages in the world. But as we will see later, the language is still not secured because the transmission is not secured. So Euskara is the language, Basque, that's how we call it. Basque, that's the name of the people, and then Ara is like the way we do. So that's the name of our language, Euskara. It's a pre-Indo-European language, which means that it's not related to Latin or Greek or those old languages from Europe. We were there in that territory before, as Lorna mentioned, people from like the Romans, or before that, the Celtics, the Romans, Muslims, Hebrews. So we've been in touch with many peoples through history. And yeah, it's quite a bit, I think it's fascinating that we have kept the language. And actually, we struggled with the language on the 17th century. That was the first time that the Spanish monarchs at the time and the French would have, we will see later, like a strong policy against the languages that were not French or Spanish. And then later on, during the dictatorship that we had from the 36, so 1936, or sorry, 39 after the Civil War to the 75 when the dictator passed away. So yeah, we had to go on the revitalization process, as we will say later. There is 9 dialects, so even if it's a pretty small area, there is still a big diversity of how they speak. And usually it's been pretty, like every valley will have their own dialect. So if you go across the mountains, you will still understand what they are saying, but they might use a different verb or even vocabulary. So I think it's interesting in our culture, the mountains connect us. So in the way we used to connect with the people from the other valley. And then rivers, they divide the territory. So yeah, so here when you see the border, that's because there is a river there. So that's how the territory was organized. So about the language, Basque is official in 4 or 3 territories, plus a piece of another territory. And we got the official key in the late 70s when the dictator died. And then in the 80s, that little piece over there. And then as you can see, the northern part, so the French part, they don't have the official key, only French is official. And even in the southern area, the gray area there, only Spanish is the official language. I actually live now in that area, the gray area on the south. And being from up north, where we do have our language rights guaranteed, is very different. Like the dynamics in the communities and the cities with the language. So with all that context and all those connections with people and why we maintain the language, I don't really know, but I think there is some key points that I think could help. And I think one is being adapted to change. I think being in contact with that many people gave us like a capacity to adapt to the change, but still keeping our identity. Also bilingualism. So at the time of the Romans, people would speak Latin, but they would keep the language, the Basque language at home. So this is when like during Franco's time, like the language we would keep at home. So there was this culture of bilingualism. So we need Latin for work, but Basque is our language for the family and the home. I think also the clandestine practices. So during Franco's time in the dictatorship, especially women, they did have a crucial or central role for maintaining the language. So they would gather the kids at night in a basement, and they would teach the kids, because kids were not allowed to learn the language at school or speak the language at school. So they would teach them to write and to do math and so everything that they were doing at school, but at night they would do it in Basque. So that was a very important role. And maintaining the traditional law and privileges. So we do have special privileges and law in some of the territories of Basque countries. So that has helped, especially like with education, with health. We have the power to do, like, for example, for the curriculum, to develop the Basque curriculum and teach it at school. we will have the Spanish curriculum as reference, but we can develop our own curriculum and take that home. I think it's really important to also learn about your own history and the context of where we live in. We also have a strong community sense, which I think it's also key in every little community, how people gather when there is something to do, like for the winter, when they bring the wood to the community, and it might be my wood, but everybody in the community would come to my place if they see the wood pile, and then come and help because they know they might get their own pile and they might need help. So that idea of community and living together, I think it helps you for language revitalization. And then to hold on our identity, I think it's something for different reasons. The Basque also had to, we were travelers to because of the political issues, people had to leave, and they always hold on to their identity and the language. So I think that's something important for the language work. And then I have there culminated, and that's something that we always have in mind. So the language, my language is what it makes me Basque. Also the land where I live and my territory. But if I lose my language, I would lose my identity. Part of the Basque people, right? So as I said before, right, we had there was two strong protests against the Basque and language substitution, and it was in Spain and also in France. Those were captions of historical documents from different times, and what it basically says is that French or Spanish are the main languages of those countries, and people are not allowed to speak it. Kids should be punished at school. People who went to jail, they were killed. So, and that's my grandparents and parents' generations. So it was not that long ago. Things that I've heard in the communities too, wash their mouths with soap, or like eat with the rule, or like they would have a necklace that the kid who spoke in Basque would have to wear, so everybody knew he was speaking in Basque. And if he saw somebody speaking in Basque, then he would give that person away and give them the necklace. And the last one who had the necklace at the end of the day, the school day, would be nice. So like even kid, or he would have to like stay in the school, or like, yeah. So all those practices, of course, had an influence, right, in the state of the language. So these are keystones for language revitalization. I just have to summarize with a few that I think are important. So the beginning of the private immersion schools. These private immersion schools are not part of the public system, so they are run by parents and teachers, and they started early in the century. They are called the Castor. There is also the university on the late 30s, the Academy of the Basque Language, beginning of the century, the Standard Basque. So there was also a process of standardization to use the language like on the newspapers, the TVs, at the school. We kept the dialects, but they figured out a way to create like like a standard language so everybody could understand each other, but without losing the dialects. The official way of the language in the late 70s, and then the adult immersion schools in the 80s. So that is close to where I was born in the 80s. And then there is the Corrica. So there is some events that are really important for language revitalization. And that event is a running event that goes all the way around Basque Country. And I had the chance to participate this year because I've been like 9 years out of Basque Country. And it's basically like there's an elder or a language speaker, fluent speaker, who writes a message, puts it in a container, and then people run all around the territory. and positive containers, so positive the message towards language revitalization. And then when but it's many kilometers, I don't remember now, but it's pretty long. It's like a 10-day or and the running doesn't stop. So even at night, it's everything organized kilometer by kilometer. So the message gets back to the end, and then they read the message for that year. And yeah, so it's organized by one of the adult immersion schools. And the money is for language revitalization and for immersion programs. And then, yeah, the Basque TV and radio and the presence in the internet, so that came later. But yeah, it's been important for language revitalization. So today, after 30 years of this program, there's more than 40 local media. There is a newspaper, national newspaper, who was also shut down 10 years ago. And now it's running again, a different one, but similar. The private immersion schools, 111 private immersion schools. There is also immersion programs at the public school, from K-12. Adult immersion schools, 100 publications, interpreting and translation services and tools, and also the strong activism. I think that's very important. So for the language revitalization process, the driving force of the process is the people. So we understand that the institutions and the support of the institutions and the schools is really important, but it's actually the speakers and the people who has to move that movement or forward. And then to finish, this is where I work now. So within that, picture for language revitalization, I work at the Sociolinguistic Academy, which is a research center for language revitalization. So we are like a liaison between the academic fields. So we work with universities and we work with the communities. So we connect both worlds with this morning, actually, we were talking about how important it is to connect the academic knowledge to the practical and to the field, right? So we do that, and we do projects for like diagnosis, like how many speakers, language assessments, and also we develop methodologies for like intervention for language teaching at schools or activation, language activation with youth, even youth and sports, and yeah, so we have different kind of projects. And then diffusion, that's, we always share the content and share the results with the communities and apply the results, get an application, a practical application. So that picture down there, Verbal Pico, that's a project that I'm working on now. And that's, we develop a language learning methodology for kids from grade 1 to grade 4. And it's based on real communication. So it's only oracy. So they develop their speaking skills. They don't write, they don't read. It's just speaking in a circle, sharing your own stories. But there is a curriculum for what they or the teachers have to document in every session. We also did a research, and we had very good results on that. We also work on the emotional connection to the language, which we think it's very important to be able to revitalize the language. And then we also do, like language assessment, right? So one of them is this in 2016, that was the last one. It is done every 4 years. And the results were that almost 28% are Basque speakers. There is passive speakers within, like Susan was saying, that they understand the language, but they want to produce the language, and then non-Basque speakers. And then another result was that women use the language more. than men, and that is because in at least in Basque Country, and I think in other cultures too, women have had a very important role in the transmission of the language and the transmission, just the bringing up of the kids, right? And then another result that I think it's interesting is that when children are around, people use the language more. They use the language more. So I think until now we have the light on the kids, and we need to get speakers. We need to get the kids to learn. But I think now, as we will see here, we have new challenges. So we got new speakers, which is great. And to revitalize the language, you need new speakers. You also need places where those speakers can speak their language. But the thing is that if you don't secure the intergenerational transmission, that language is not going to survive. So now we are working on that intergenerational transmission and also the socialization of the language. So like getting the people to speak it. I think here it's also interesting that 30 years ago, most of the speakers were older. So they were like in their 50s. And now most of the speakers are kids and young people. So I think the pyramid just shifted. So yeah, that's what we are now for the Basque language. And then that was to locate myself, where I come from, and why I got connected to Russell, and why I end up working with the South team. So I came to Canada in 2012. For a trip, I got a work permit and just wanted to travel. And then I got to Vancouver and I started to learn about Indigenous languages in Canada. In Europe, we don't get as much information as we get about other parts of the world. So yeah, we didn't know anything about Indigenous peoples or the history happened. So then when I got to Vancouver, I started to learn things, and I was like, this is interesting. Like, so things were like clicking in my mind, like this is very similar to what we lived back home. And I ended up living in Williams Lake at some point. And that's the place where I met Russell through another friend. When I said I was Basque and that I had this background in language revitalization, and they said, oh, maybe you are interested in visiting the communities, and maybe you can work with them, or you can. And I was very excited. I said, yeah, I think I would love to understand more or learn more about the work or what's happening here. And that's how I connected with us. And the first couple of years, the first year, I just visited the community. We started talking about a research project, and somehow we wanted to see how many speakers and what resources we had. And so anyways, the first thing that I did is visiting the community and visiting the school, being in the class, learn the language. So for me, it was very important to learn the language and to understand the culture. I think you need to understand and to be able to communicate in the language. So Russell introduced me to elders and teachers. Mariah Myers has been my teacher for the last 10 years. William Myers too, who was in the video. So yeah, that was the first step. Then once we got the language project idea going, we realized we had to do an LNA, which is this one, Indigenous 18. I had this slide because I think it's important to know that South Cotin has the highest linguistic or language virality in BC. So it's still in danger, right? And only 20% of the population are fluent. But compared to other languages in BC, their speakers are younger, and some of the parents and the grandparents still speak the language at home. They also have resources that were created in the 80s, like a grammar, an alphabet. So according to first peoples to restart the language in the homes is possible because they have the resources for it. So that was the first step, like knowing how many speakers we have in the community, what resources we have to work on language revitalization. So in Indigenous 18, as Russell commented earlier, we 450 people registered and around 100 speakers. Most of the speakers are 45 years or older, and then the learners are the kids, so under 20 are the ones that are learning. And actually, today, Russell mentioned the Zoom courses and the language courses. So those are usually adult students taking the courses. This language assessment was done by an elder and a teacher, a language teacher. And that was something that I thought it was really cool for like measurement of speakers in the community. So yeah, we sat down here with the community list and we'll see how many speakers we have. And in Basque Country, we have many people to do, like when we do a language assessment project, yeah, it's a very different methodology. And in Stone, we just did it, you know, just having a coffee and like, okay, we have as many speakers and it was nice. So they knew everyone in every house and their language level. So after that, we joined the First Peoples Language Revitalization Planning Program. So this was when we started the relationship with First Peoples back in 2015. And with Alien for Care that Lorna mentioned before. And in this program, well, the main goal was to develop a strategic language revitalization plan. We also formed a language committee. We developed a vision statement. We talked about the repository of language resources, and we also developed terms of reference for the community. This program was done by 3 communities, so Hanik Tink, that's called Indigenous 18. And the first thing we did was developing the vision statement. So this is a document where all the, like, where are we going? Why do we want to do this? Why we want to revitalize the language? How we want to revitalize the language? And what are the key points for us? What is the language for us? And how are we going to do it? It is a very important document to have it as a kind of go-to document because this is a long process of 10 years. So having this initial document where you can come back and say, why did we start doing this and what we wanted to achieve? And we still use it. So, for the language revitalization plan, so we have several meetings with the language committee, and on those meetings, we would talk about how we want to revitalize the language, what are our priorities, what kind of projects we want to do, and then we collect all our information from the language committee, and then we were able to organize those ideas into strategies and then to main goals. So the main goals for the project was increasing the number of speakers, documenting the language, bridging the language gap between generations, building teaching capacity, and developing language governance. So as you can see down here in the picture, there is 3 members of the language committee, and they are voting. So they had a chance to vote what are the priorities for each community. From all the 3 communities worked on this together, we were very aware that even if it's the same language, every community has different needs. They may have different resources. And so then their priorities might be different too. So even though we work together on this document, every community got their own document with the priorities they wanted to work on. So as Russell commented earlier, we are using that document to implement those strategies and those priorities that the language committee identified. And these are some of the projects that we had in the last 8 years. So there is an immersion camp that Russ showed pictures before, Nenkaniko, so that's the language net, language mentorship with to young people learning language with adults or elders. In too many like different ways, like one learn the language more like to teach the language at school and to support the language teacher, and another one she learning more in the home setting. So like she wanted to learn how to cook in South Philippines, how to go to a grocery store, how to share a meal, and she wanted to learn the language for the kids. So it was interesting too because they almost defined their own program. So it was yeah. Then there is curriculum, language sharing events, and the language committee meetings like they happen to monitor all the programs. And then inside that picture of language revitalization in Unit 18, we did a collaborative research project. This was done by the Unit 18 government and my universities of the University of the Basque Country. And what we wanted to do was to hear the voices of the community. So we had the perspectives of the language committee in that language plan, but we also wanted to include everybody in the community and to hear what their thoughts were regarding language revitalization. So those are the objectives of the research. Identify the community needs towards like language revitalization, strategies and language resources, analyze the language knowledge and usage of the community, identify the reasons why the language was lost or the speakers were reduced in the community, and why it is important to recover the language. So all those perspectives, they were applied to the language plan that was developed in 2016. And so the new draft that we created on 2021 all those perspectives included. So that was a very important, important point for the language research project. So this project had a complex ethical framework, like not complex, but comprehensive, I want to say. So it had to be a participatory research project. So everybody in the community or participating in the project had a role somehow, and we respected the roles of the elders, the community respected the protocols and the codes of practice. We wanted to build research capacity. So there was community members and participants just helping with the research activities. We heard the interpretation of the results. There was mutual benefits. So there was a benefit for the academic field. So in addition to the contribution to the academic field, there was also a practical application of the results. The community also had a benefit on that, right? So the methodology as well was very important. So it was one of the first projects on that topic that followed the indigenous methodologies. So there has been language work in the communities. As I said, in the 80s, a grammar was developed and the alphabet, etc. But in this project, it was the community's voices what we wanted to cover. So it was not through my eyes, so what I could see, what I could interpret from what I saw in the community, but it was their own thoughts and their own insights on language revitalization, what it was gathered. it was very important, the relationship, like even for myself. So the relationship with the land, with the community, with the families, with the individuals. So I had to develop that relationship because I was an outsider. Collectiveness, everybody was had a role in the project. We gathered qualitative and quantitative data. It was an inductive approach. And we did a thematic analysis. So we got all the insight and then got the results in every different topic. So for language knowledge, as we said before, fluent speakers are older than 45 years old, and they learn the language in the family. There is semi-speakers, community members who have like a basic level who are under 30 and then learning. Community members. Then for the language use, the language is quite, you can hear it in the community. So it's, you can hear it every day in the events in the school. So it's still very used. They talk about challenges, like the lifestyle has changed, or the personal speakers. They talked about the trauma and colonization of residential school. And then connected to that, they talked about the language laws, like why there's not that many speakers, and the main reason that came out of residential school. They also mentioned the foster care and even the contemporary education system. When the kids went to school, when they were 5 years old, that's when they would drop off the language. And then to finish, why the language was important for the UNICEF team. And they said, which was very like, as Russell said, with the kids, when we gather their perspectives at school, it was very interesting because the kids just said, well, my grandma doesn't speak that much English, so I wouldn't be able to speak with my grandma if I didn't know the language. So it's a simple, like very simple reason, but it's very important. Like it is needed for communication. Like if we wanna, it's the connection to our elders and to our families. So yeah, that was very, very powerful. It's also the connection to the land. It brings health and wellness. So people said, I just feel better when I speak to coding. I don't know why, but I just feel better. And I feel that I speak my truth. And it's like I could describe the reality better in Tascotin than in English. I can express feelings better. So yeah, all those perspectives were put into the language revitalization plan that we just drafted last year. Also with the help of First People and the program for language revitalization. So being Basque, coming from that background, being a product of the language revitalization process in my own land, my own country, and being Indigenous 18, I could feel very identified, even with those kids at school when they said, yeah, I want to speak the language. I'm still coding, but I don't know the language. So they were not very sure why, but they had the same feelings that I had when I was a kid. So I just brought a few ideas that I think can be applied to any language revitalization process. And one is related to the idea of speakers do not stop speaking their mother tongue. Just there is always a process of colonization or assimilation right behind it in different moments in history, but the consequences are the same, right? There is historical trauma, there is identity issue, and that happens in every people where the language has been neglected. So the language, why it is important, and I think this can be like a Basque person reads this and understands, and I think people from UNICEF understand, and I think it's also similar to any process. So the connection to the identity, the culture, the land, as a people. So that's something that the language is the link between generations with our ancestors and family, and health and well-being. And the language gives us special glasses to see the reality. Like if I speak Basque Country, or if I speak English in Basque Country, or if I speak Spanish, like all those languages, especially my mother tongue or my heritage language, which is Basque, give me special glasses so I can see my own reality. So that was an idea that also came up. Language revitalization is a collective process, so it's a shared responsibility that has to be taken at every level. So at the nation level, the community level, the family, the individual. So there is different responsibilities that need to be met to be able to have a successful process. Then another idea is that our own story with the language, our own language biography, right? Like who am I? Where do I come from? Why was the language lost in my family? Who was the last speaker? So all that needs to be taken into account. Like even the social linguistic characteristics in the area. In Basque Country, even if it's a small territory, we have very different situations with many, like there's more speakers, less speakers, there is more people who came from southern Spain. So all that needs to be taken into account. So the strategies are not just developed and cannot apply just in every context. It has to be designed for the specific context of that community. And then learning the language, so there has to be a change of perspective. So learning the language is okay, but what we want to achieve is to be in the language, right? So that's related to the importance of the use of the language. And to finish, in every process of language revitalization, there needs to be a process of acknowledgement and reconciliation, and just understand what happened and why we got there. And I'm talking about the last experience too, but it's people need to understand, even the speakers, like what happened and why it was lost in my family, and like to heal that trauma, even like to not to feel ashamed, or like just understand why you got to that point where you use your language. And also in this case, the Spanish government, the French government, they also need to understand and to acknowledge what happened. So I think that's very important for the language revitalization process to be successful. Then immersion programs, intergenerational transmission have to be secured. As I said earlier, institutional support is important, but the people is the driving force. So actually the speakers need to want and need to have that too, like I want to recover my language. But the support is very important. And for example, the work first people doing, and of course, it's central. And the processes that what we learned in Basque Country after 30 years is that the reality is constantly changing. So we also need to adapt the strategies and the language plans to the new reality, right? Like every few years. And then to finish, the idea that Lorna mentioned before, every language revitalization process needs to be developed by the people. Like it has to be based on our worldviews and protocols and how we see their reality, but strong networks and alliances and communication between people that are going through the same, that may have the same or similar challenges is essential for that towards a successful language revitalization process. And up to here. Thank you. Miyasker.
I think the Paula and Russ shared lots, and you might have some questions. And before I open it for questions, I just wanted to, I forgot to introduce Gordon Laren. Gordon, if you want to stand up, he's at the back there. Gordon is the CEO of the First Peoples Cultural Foundation. And he does lots of really, really good work to keep all the programs moving and functioning. And thanks, Gordon. And he brought you those. Well, that was a lot. And while you were speaking, I was just thinking that I went home to my home community. I think I mentioned last week, and my 6-year-old grandson was with me, and he learned 2 new words on our trip. The first one that he learned was heat. Heat. And the heat in my language is the monster that lives in the lake. And at 6 years old, he's really into monsters. And so he liked learning that word. The other word that he learned was pishp. Pishp. And see, it's hard to get those sounds that, from the different parts of your mouth and throat. But pishp in my language is fart. 6-year-old loud. And he learned that word because somebody gave him one of those little fart pillows. And he was trying to figure out, to plan how his grandmother was going to sit on this pillow. And so anyway, so he learned those 2 words in the 2 days we were home. Very nice. Well, we're going to have some questions and comments, because in our world, we don't really ask that many questions when people speak, but so you can do comments too. But it's a time for you to share. And then we have a wonderful, wonderful person who's going to sing and to close our session today. So any questions or comments that you have for Russ and for Paula? Yes, Bud.
First, thank you so very much, Paula and Russell, for coming here and being with us. Fascinating stories. I know a little bit about the Basque history and a little bit about Chilcotin history, but I learned a lot more today. I'm interested in what do you think, how do you think universities can better support recovery and revitalization of language? You've got these 2 experiences. What do you think we could be doing? I don't mean just UVic. UVic, of course, has to do more, but in general, what is there a role for universities in this recovery, this movement of language revitalization?
Well, I'll go. So I did my PhD. So I do know the academic world, and I think there is a lot to do, but I think maybe shifting the perspective, the old perspective of how we do research, for example, right? Like with this collaborative project and methodologies that we follow. It was actually the research came from the needs in the community. So they developed, it was developed in a collective way where they thought that it was needed for research. In this case, I did have my role, but what I mean is that perhaps the knowledge needs to come from the communities or from the needs, and then the institutions support those needs. Instead of maybe the opposite that has been happening during history, right? That's my perspective. I don't know.
Yeah, so Paula came to our community when I was almost ready. I was almost done with academic support. So but I think it's just about, what Paula was able to do was like, because she was doing her PhD, she was able to do the research a lot longer with her community.
Yeah.
So the project she could develop was more long-term, and it actually had like a real impact on what our planning was already. So it like fit hand in glove. So I thought that was probably just matching up with where the community is at is probably the best advice.
The best advice, yeah.
But like she said, it was like, she's just elevating everything that the community is saying already. And, we were able to sort of collectively take all the interviews, and sometimes bringing in outsiders, sometimes, maybe if I did the interviews, not all the people would be like, you already know this, Russ, or why are you asking these dumb questions or something? So sometimes maybe academics need to ask dumb questions so they get the most out of our community. And they were able to freely express everything and share maybe a lot more if we had just done it among ourselves.
Thank you.
Also, I think it was
Little bit louder.
I think I don't like to do, but yeah, I think it was sort of, interesting that it was not an interview, like Lorna said, like question answer. I think the indigenous methodologies take the protocols in the communities and how we relate to each other, and creating that environment with coffee and tea and just a chat where I could share my experience as a Basque person, and then they could share their experience as a Talcotin.
Yes.
I think the research itself was a conversation between also two peoples going on, like facing similar challenges. So I think exploring those kinds of methodologies that are respectful and responsive to the cultural, the worldviews of the people who are working in the project. I think it's also something.
Thank you both.
I think being aware, universities being aware of how their work can impact communities is really important. And I don't think we spend enough time making sure that people have that understanding. For example, because our languages vary community to community, they're different dialects. If we have somebody from one university working in one community on the language, they can take it in one direction. And then another person from maybe even from the same university or from another university works in the next community, and they're developing. And so then it divides the language. And so many of the languages in British Columbia have had to spend lots of time and energy trying to figure out like what systems they're going to use. For example, like what writing system they'll use. And because Indigenous people or First Nations people are very, very loyal, they become very loyal to the people that they work with. And so they don't want to change, and so it makes it very difficult. And so universities teaching the impacts of the work they do that can, on communities is a really big thing. Thanks, Bud. Any other comments, questions? I'll go over here, then I'll come over there. Go ahead.
Hi, Tricia. Want to acknowledge, first of all, Lorna being our host and inviting us to this session today. My hands on the university and bringing out food, first of all. As a Livingston's and Satanage, Yelena, Glen Jim, I'm from Satanage territory. I just want to acknowledge your words today. You know, I met this pair through my work as a language revitalization coach for people. So again, listening to you folks just solidified some of the work that we do for the communities around the province. So hearing the processes, the methodology that you use, the challenges and barriers, definitely we see those all the time, but I just wanted to raise my hands and thank you for sharing your work with me. I came here today again to do my work a little bit better. And what I heard today helps me do that. So again, I just want to raise my hands again to you, Lorna. And I just want to add something to your question, to what they were talking about earlier about what can the universities do to support the communities. Something that I learned over the last few years because of COVID and other challenges and barriers. As much as we have the ability to fund programs and communities to deliver those programs, one of the challenges that we faced was the capacity within communities to be able to deliver them. You know, grading language speakers is awesome because again, with those speakers, you get teachers and use as Paula was mentioning, you know, learning is great, but using is even better. But part of that challenge is delivering those programs within communities. So yes, the language teachers are awesome to have because again, it happens that they share that. One of the challenges that we faced was getting people within communities to deliver those programs. So the administrative capacity was a challenge. The challenge of developing projects and programs within communities and have an understanding of the different methodologies that are used to do that. That's a challenge. So for me, to answer that question, the capacity outside of the language. This gentleman I just met today, he was helping in the tech area of language revitalization, developing apps or developing systems to deliver programs. That is the area that's definitely needed as well. So again, to answer that question. So again, but just want to raise my hands to all you folks for coming and sharing. So again,
Thank you for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm East, I'm in Gibson territory. So I want to echo Glenn's acknowledgement of the hard work that you're doing. I know that the best is out the most with you, the quoting, you know, the work that we have done to better and further on the cause of our Indigenous communities within BC and across Canada and across the world is very valuable. I walk in two worlds as a hereditary chief's family from the Gibson territory. I go home every year, live by Christina, harvest my smoked salmon, and it's the feasting system. I also work for the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation here in Victoria. And one of the things I just participated in a Pacific Association of First Nations Women's event a couple of weekends ago. And, you know, I was looking at your presentation and understanding the challenges of bridging that generational gap between the generations as well as living in the language. And, you know, what I'm seeing is, and what was shared with me by a very wise lady in the PAFNW, that she was a 60 scoop survivor. And I want to acknowledge the circle of transmission of knowledge that Lorna, Dr. Lorna, sharing with us her teaching her grandson those 2 words in their language. That's transmission from an elder speaker to a young child who's learning. This young lady shared a story of her, the 60 swoop survivor going away from her community and her children. She very much wanted her children to be a part of their language. So she put them in a language program as little elementary school kids. And so she took the course through a class, a union class, and her kids were learning it in the language nest. And she shared that it was actually quite amazing because as a young learner, their ability to remember and recall those words was very profound. And her, as an older adult, trying to learn, it was really difficult for her to remember certain words. So they were working within the home together, making dinners, doing whatever they were doing. They would try and speak in the language. And she said it was amazing to her how when her kids weren't there, she'd try and speak it, you know, herself and talk to herself, and she couldn't remember certain things. But when her kid was there, her children, she would say, "What's that word?" And they would bring it out, and they're talking quite regular. So looking at, you know, with those gaps, and like they're using it in the classroom but not at home. You know, the students who are learning it in Zoom calls but not at home. That, you know, it happened. Residential school took the children from their communities. Now we need to put that language back into our family systems, right? And so this weaving and braiding of the colonial and the Indigenous ways of knowing regarding language is so valuable. And I just wanted to share that as an example of, you know, what could be another way of a program that literally supports the whole unit as a family to speak and live in the language at home while they're learning in a contemporary learning education system, right, that we've got set up right now. So, and I know that when I go home in the food for food fishing, there's a lot of accent being taught. And like I said, I know words, right? And I can share words, and the next generation coming up, I share those same words with them. But you know, that's something that I just really resonated with me today. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you. Did you want to say something, or were you just pointing?
I didn't want to point. I sat at the a look, but quail. See it all, it's the Moxi's Quincy. Yeah, so ran fast in the snake. The needs and sat next to eat poets and needs and topleth and the help to meet them squall. Heil eiten swallow and pinnis eat tape at swallow a ton of quail. I just wanted to get up and thank you guys, Heights at Classium, for your work today. It's really big work that you're putting together, and acknowledge you for your words. You said at the beginning that it's that the importance of sharing and how much we can grow from sharing. And I really thank you for laying the groundwork and sharing with everybody the amount of work that you go through for your community and everything that's involved from Indigenous, from a Guam perspective, that it's not just one area that we have to focus on, but that we're pulled in all of these different areas, and there's all of these different jobs we need to do. I really wanted to share that I really appreciated the words that you shared today about your experience working with this nation here, with the Tsilhqot'in people. What I heard today was that you spent 2 years building those relationships, going around and just visiting people. And I think that that's what I wanted to highlight for I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but what universities can do.
But
Yeah, but that was what I heard from the presentation is that she spent 2 years visiting communities, laying her groundwork and making connections, learning their language so that she could understand where they're coming from. And I really think that that is the importance, that is the work that people coming from outside can do to help Indigenous people reclaim their languages. I really thank you for sharing your story, because it lets me know that, you know, you said back in the 1700s, when you first met that force that was trying to take your language, and that gives me inspiration, because I know that as Indigenous people, that we're resilient and that we can keep putting up the good fight. And I thank you for your words, what you said to me, where what I heard today, you say that sometimes we need a good fight to show us what our values are. Those are really important words that I'm going to take home with me today. So thank you for sharing that. I just really couldn't not get up and share how I feel about what was being shared today, especially at the end. You had, or throughout the presentation, there was talk about how the importance has to be put on living the language. And thank you for emphasizing that message and bringing that forward, because it's so important. And the final points that you made, especially 13 and 15, were very, you know, it really is. I think that that is also something that universities can do, is understand that this work needs to be, led from grassroots. This has to be, the knowledge that is within communities needs to be acknowledged. And thank you for acknowledging the Indigenous methodologies, although they are not, they're so different from, you know, Eurocentric methodologies. They are there, and we recognize them, we acknowledge them, and we practice them today. And even though we're very different, I don't have questions to get up and ask, but I do want to thank you for your words. And I think that that is really, thank you for asking that question, because I really think that is an important question, and that is important work that can be laid out and addressed. And I just really appreciated what was shared today, and I'm going home with so much just the way that you organized your presentation, you know, just as simple as saying, set out that vision statement, and when you find the money, go back and revisit that and start checking it off, because it's such huge work. You know, we think, where do we begin? And I've spent a few years wondering where we begin. And so just being able to hear somebody say, first we sat down and did this. Oh, good idea. That's a good idea. And also for understanding the different dialects and different communities coming together, but still having a shared vision. And I really appreciate that about your work, that you did that work and you visited each community and recognized that there are different values in each community, and allowed each community to share that with you in their time and in their way. I think that that is so beautiful, and that is exactly what is needed here in BC, and for each community to have that individual report. And that's exactly why I asked the question earlier of First Peoples, if they have a breakdown for each community, because each community should have their own report of where we're at and what are our priorities, what do we need to work on, because it does differ community to community. I'm here with my friends, my family, Sietya. I am honored to work with these ladies on the language, and they come from, these two come, this is my daughter here, who's learning the language with me, Sierra, and Naomi and Candace, and they come from a different community. And I keep reminding them over and over again that we we can work together as one. So it was very inspirational to hear that today. And we were sitting here nodding, saying, yes, yes, this is what we're doing here today, is showing up. So I just want to thank you all. See you, Tala.
Anybody else?
Rachel, ay panaspanangay hila Kongen, the Edmonton at the Kongen. Hejka Aquins, Giuseppe that Stepanets that na Salil that class, kind of external. Good day, good to see everyone. Welcome to the homeland of the Lekwungen people. I'm from Lekwungen territory, and I just learned how to say thank you for following the teachings of our ancestors. It's really good medicine. So I just wanted to share that as one of the only Lekwungen people here. I definitely felt the like, get up, say something. Wanted to echo that, how important it is, the work that you're doing, and that you're following the teachings of all the ancestors who've come before both of you. It's very inspiring, especially someone who's living their language, and I can't even speak my language to my mom yet, she doesn't know it. So just us learning it together, it's really beautiful to see the work that you're doing and how we can follow in what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask Aliki or about tomorrow to come up and say something about tomorrow. And before you, and as you're coming up, I just wanted to point out this photograph of a tree. And when I was in the Basque country, what I learned there was the way they feel about their oak tree is the same way that we feel about our cedar tree, because over there it serves as their focal point when they gather to make decisions. And it also serves almost every part of their lives, from the building, ships, and everything, just the same way that here the cedar tree provides for us. So that was another really wonderful connection. And so Aliki, are you going to talk about tomorrow?
Well, first, thank you so much, Lorna, for hosting today. Of course, your wisdom and sharing your words and your wisdom with us. It's always so impactful. I've already made you feel so uncomfortable with her, and so I'm just not going to do that anymore. And give you.
Thank you very much, Jen.
Of course. Thank you.
Well, and thank all of you for coming and sharing and participating in this wonderful afternoon. So Aliki, do you want to share about tomorrow, and then San?
Yes, go for it. It's Rachel. I just wanted to acknowledge to the speakers who stood up and spoke, and especially our Lekwungen speaker, learner. So for that, for the words. Aliki Tanasne. I'm just borrowing a couple words of Sanchatan Lekwungen to say my name is Aliki. I didn't introduce myself earlier. And I just, sorry, I'm so much talking with everybody.
Yeah, there you go.
Story of my life. Okay. She should see my children. So we just wanted to say a few words about what's happening tomorrow, and then welcome Christine to come and close us for the day. We're so excited that she was able to come today. So a huge Hajka, Grela Kesla, Medu, so many thank yous in so many languages to Lorna and to our speakers today. I'm not sure, Suzanne, you're still there. Paula and Russell, was just so lovely to hear from all of you and to learn about the context. And I loved the background, and I loved, Russell, how you framed it in the history and the fight, and both you and Paula did that. And I think that's so important because we're not trying to learn and teach languages in a vacuum. We're not in a sterile classroom trying to teach. We're in context all the time. And as you say, that context is shifting and changing all the time. And my heart feels very full that you are all here today and you come, and we hope that you come tomorrow. I'm really excited if you come tomorrow. We're going to look more at a UVic context, a little bit more locally. We've got some Chinchapan colleagues coming, and we are going to hear from Onawa and Eva about the Natalnos project. And we're going to launch a little film that was made looking back on some of the impacts that Lorna's also featured in. So we'll welcome Lorna back tomorrow. So we hope that you come tomorrow, and we hope that those of you online, I'm looking at you, but you can't tell. Oh, there you are. I hope that I'm so technically skilled. I hope that you all come tomorrow too. So I think we can introduce Christine and close the day and hope that everyone has a wonderful night. So Christine Pham is a local young woman who does a lot of the drumming and singing in the convocation ceremonies. And so we're really lucky that she's agreed to come this afternoon and flow us with good songs and good feelings. So hi, Christine, we'll turn the floor over to you.
Today I introduced myself with my traditional name, and that was recently given to me by my mother and my late grandparents, Virginia and Norman George. And that's who I've learned a lot of my teachings from, is my late grandparents. They took the time to travel me as a young child. So in my younger days, I was traveled by my grandma to learn how to creator, a good creator, and sing our healing songs and know the difference between the songs that we use, and really indulge and invest in our teachings that they had to lay down for us as long as I could. So now I have the honor to be able to teach it to my own children in our own community. And I've really raised my hands to Larissa for speaking our raw language. And it's really humble and uplifting to hear. You got it down. I unfortunately, my tongue doesn't let me kind of speak it as fluent, but I can understand it, and that alone is a big step for me. So Haichika again, I would like just to share the song I'll be sharing with you today is I sing with the Lokonian dance group, and that's our local drummers and dancers. And that's with Del Dick and her late husband. That's the one day I've kept it going in the Lokonian territories. The song that I'm pretty sure we'll be singing as Wednesday. Is that it? No, I know that our dance group poll will be here Wednesday. I hope that's for your guys' group, because I'd love to share more songs with you. The whole set is definitely an uplift, and I really enjoy singing with our elders and my aunties. The prayer song that I'll be sharing with you today is was taught to us by our late elder Ray Peters in the Cowichan. And I just can't thank my grandma Dell enough for allowing me to sing with her and her daughters in this time, because normally this is where a respected elder would stand. But today I came to represent along with Lokonian people. So Haichika for having us here at this time. What we at sunset, At not subway. Thank you to our, lovely sisters who could sing with me as well. It's really an honor to be able to sing with one another. I would like to also explain that the roots are resigned from our Lily and George, who were resigned from the Pungan territories, and my father is from the Sartlip Nation in West Saanich. So HKSCM for having me again. That is quite honored to be able to share a song and sing a song with our, community. It's quite an uplift to be here and to be able to share some teachings and share a song. Thank you to the organizers for having me as well. Thank you so much. Thank you.